All right, y'all. Thank you for coming back for episode one. In this episode, I'm going to be reading a short story I wrote called Prologue. It would actually go on to be the basis for my novel, The Watching Woods. Um, Once again, as always, thank you to Dusty Saddle Publishing and Raventail Publishing, your home for Western tales and horror. All right, thanks.
Welcome. This is Raventail. Airplane. Bird. Silence. Rain pattered mercilessly against the woven grass mats and cedar bark shingles of 3 small roofs. They clustered together amidst a thin grouping of trees. Dark forest towered beyond. Soft sounds of water licking at the riverbank rode beneath the roar of upstream river rapids thundering in the air. A sweep of wind picked at a corner where the nearest roof met earth, lifting it to clear a vision of the man and woman huddled inside. There was just enough space for 2 more in the pit house they had erected the day before. 4 other men and 2 women were nestled beneath the neighboring roofs, grateful to be out of the elements and eager for their hands and feet to warm. 2 were still in the woods. The storm had come quick, and they'd gone farther than the others that morning, harvesting a long stretch of berry bushes at the wood's sunny edge. Here in the shelters, the men and women fed off the salmon they'd pulled from the river hours earlier. The salmon had swam upstream, returning to offer itself to the people again this year. The rest would come soon, as they had the year before and all those prior, back to a primeval dawn when they'd seen the people's ancient forefathers in need. The people, living as their ancients had, paid a solemn respect in turn, as they'd been shown since they were old enough to understand, slicing the first salmon into small pieces that everyone present reverentially consumed. Airplane. Then pointing the head of the salmon upstream and returning its carcass to the water so that it could reconstitute itself. Nobody could remember when they'd begun this. It'd simply always been. The spear used to catch the salmon was resting in the smoldering fire at their feet. It needed to be purified before returning to the water. This was a world of such sacred respects. Some rays had found their way through the cloud cover to shine here and there, the trees above the pit houses casting shadows that moved with the wind. But the sunlight flickered too, not from canopy or cloud, but as if, in this world, God's order that there be light was being pushed back against by the dark. A few minutes of sun prevailed, steaming the rainfall off the ground to hang in the air like a sticky primordial syrup. But then darkness clamored back, and the pit houses fell into sudden twilight. High in a tree above, a large owl watched them. An owl always watched them. Its yellow eyes stared intently at the ground below, its face rotating and its eyes lifting to the thin trunks and spindly branches hanging above the men and women below. A heavy curtain of black fell. Airplane. Silence. Leaves rained down in spiraling arcs. Some sticks fell too, lifting eyes to roofs and causing scowls to move through the couples huddled underneath. This storm could be trouble. It was too dark. Much, much too dark. The people in the pit houses knew of this. This, too, was a part of their world. They'd been told it since they were old enough to understand. One of the men, one with lean, muscular arms and proud, broad shoulders, picked himself up and moved to crawl out. But as he did, he found his eyes closing. It was irresistible. His left elbow crumpled and his hand slipped out, crashing his face to the ground. His eyes flickered but fell into darkness. In the larger pit behind his, the male and female fell unconscious, their bodies splayed awkwardly atop the dirt. In the third pit house, neither slouched. Their eyes remained open, not knowing what was happening feet away. They knew it was dark, but clouds could do that. So the man comforted his female with soft words. The darkness trembled against this resistance, but then fell darker still. This was a blackness. Suddenly a white light shone through the trees from some distant source. More leaves twirled to the roofs and twigs rained once again. Airplane. He pulled her closer, but even as he did, a shadow crossed over the roof above his head. He didn't see it. He couldn't see it, but its long, thin silhouette crossed over the roof, coming to a sudden pause. They'd have been breathless if they could see outside. They'd have rallied to some impotent defense if the others had been able to raise a warning. But they were all out, save for just these two. When the roof crumbled at its center, under the weight of the shadow, both the male and female could only lift their hands in surprise before the man's skin was yanked upward from the ankle, like the skin of a snake pulled from tail to fang. She screamed, seeing the pink of his oily, moist muscles shivering inches from her face. And then the long shadow came back. This. And then the long shadow came back. This was the world. This was the world. This was the world. This was the world. Now let's go with the first one. Let's try another one. This was the world. This was the world. This was their world.